We bring you greetings from Charleston, South Carolina. On behalf of my members that we represent back there and those that are living the struggle every day of their lives, we want to say greetings to you and thank you for all you have done thus far, and thank you for all that you plan to do. As was already mentioned and laid out to you, we are in a very significant struggle in South Carolina. For some of you have heard this message before, and I ask that you bear with us as we try to let some of the folks who have not heard it hear about some of the things that are taking place in South Carolina. I will first begin by telling you a little about the climate there, what it's like to live the life of labor in South Carolina. We come from a state that is a right-to-work state. We come from a state that loves to pride itself on the fact that they have the lowest union density in all of the 50 states. Next to us is North Carolina. They are 49th. We come from a state that until recently flew the Confederate flag on the State House dome. And all you have read about it in the economic boycott that was placed in our state by the NAACP. That campaign was somewhat successful, but the boycott remained in place. Why? Because even though the flag came down from the dome, it was placed on a flagpole right in our face with lights to be shined upon it at night. It's still in the place of sovereignty. We recognize the fact that to some, it is a symbol of their heritage, and some of them actually believe that. We see it as a symbol of hatred. But for those who respect that flag because of its heritage, we respect that, but we think that that particular flag should be placed in a place of honor in some museum or someplace like that, but not in a place of sovereignty. So the economic boycott continues in South Carolina. Until recently, we were the only state in the union that did not recognize Martin Luther King's birthday as a national holiday. That was just granted to us by the State Assembly last year, but we had to give something for that. We had to also grant the opposition a Confederate memorial holiday as well. So it came with a price. We come from a state where labor is oppressed on a daily basis, where someone could be arrested and put in a mental institution against their will, injected against their will, and kept there for 2 weeks before they got out because he wanted a union in his plant. 2020, I think our Dateline did a piece on this some months ago. And it was a Tenneco plant down in South Carolina. We come from a state where the corporations work very closely with DHEC and environmental people and OSHA, where we have a battery producing plant where workers come inside with very low lead levels in their bodies, which is natural. And within a matter of weeks, their lead levels are so high that they take that lead home and it affects their family. And some of them have actually become sterile as a result of those exposure to lead. We come from a state where they implement and use on a regular basis the alien certification program. And I don't know if any of you are even familiar with it. We weren't even familiar with it, where the corporations, the hotel chains, and those in the hospitality industry would put out ads in the paper looking for workers, American workers, and for $5 an hour. And when no Americans respond, they then apply to the alien certification program and bring in workers from other countries like Mexico and Puerto Rico and Jamaica, and put them in these housing complexes of 5 and 6 in an apartment, and also subsidize their health care. we take the position that if you were to subsidize the American worker, add the cost of the health care, add the cost of providing the housing to that $5 or $5.65 an hour salary, and certainly the American workers would accept those jobs. But that is the tactics they are using in order for the hospitality industry to actually seize a tremendous amount of cheap labor. We live these conditions every day. There is no hidden agenda in South Carolina. Big business, who controls the Republican Party there, have advertised on the front pages of the newspapers that we plan to keep South Carolina a union-free state. The Attorney General of South Carolina, who is actually prosecuting this case and charging these men with inciting a riot, just announced that he wanted to be the next governor of South Carolina. And the same day that he made those announcements, he also said one of his primary goals is to rid the state of labor unions. Labor unions are bad for the state of South Carolina. When I took office 4 years ago, our union in South Carolina, our local, was perceived as a very influential union, a powerful union, a lot of resources. But in actuality, we were like a paper tiger. There was only the bark, but no bite. There was the thunder without lightning. I sought right away to try to shore up those views of our union before the truth was actually found out. We wanted to become more politically involved. We wanted to try to do things in our state to correct some of the injustices that we were seeing taking place. So we began to become very politically active. We opened up our union halls to the community to invite them in so that union as well as community could unite to try to bring about some changes in South Carolina. In our union hall on a regular basis, the NAACP have their monthly meetings. The Progressive Network of South Carolina, which represents 38 grassroots labor community organizations, meet at our union hall. The Democratic Party meets at our union hall monthly. They hold their tri-county convention at our union hall. Precincts organizational meetings are held at our union hall. So we are the beacon in the community which works to galvanize the community to say, look, we must turn our state around. We became very involved in the 1998 elections in South Carolina. We were just coming out of a 12-year reign of Republican-dominated governorship in South Carolina. So we got behind what we consider to be the best candidate who seemed to represent the views of the common man and the working people in South Carolina. It was the Democratic candidate for governor. He was a long shot because the Democratic Party had already written off South Carolina. There's no investment in South Carolina when it comes to the national election. But we sought to get very involved in that process, and because of labor, because of our involvement in the platform that we gave this candidate, for the first time in 12 years, we were able to elect a Democratic governor. And he made some commitments to us that should he be elected, he will not forget labor. Early on in his administration, he sought to live up to those commitments, those promises. For the first time in history, a labor person was appointed to his transition team. That person was Ken Riley. After the work of the transition was over, the transition team was over, he then sought to find out what could he do for the maritime community who stood so solidly behind him. Well, because prior to that time, no one from the maritime community had ever served on the Ports Authority board in South Carolina, which is a state commission. So the governor thought that he would just not appoint me right out, but he would consult with the maritime community to see who they would recommend that he appoint to represent the maritime interests. My name was suggested first. The governor then sought to make that appointment. He announced that Ken Riley was going to be appointed to the State Postal Authority. That angered the right-wingers, that angered big business, and they sent out a grassroots alert to every business in the state of South Carolina who was a member of the State Chamber of Commerce that we must defeat this nomination, because if we allowed it to go through, it will send a message to the rest of the world that South Carolina is now open to labor unions. And under extreme pressures, that nomination was pulled back. The governor asked me if I would be concerned about that. I said, no, not me as Kenny Riley. I would not be concerned that my name is pulled back because so much publicity had been built around this appointment, it was going to serve a tremendous blow to labor if it was withdrawn. They said it was too early in their campaign and their administration that they could not afford the political capital to support that nomination any longer, and it was pulled back. Immediately after that happened, legislation began to be introduced into the House that would make it virtually impossible, illegal, for any person carrying a union card from this point forward to hold any seat on any state board, agency, or commission in the state of South Carolina. It was sent to committee. We went to argue against it. It came out of committee favorably, went to the House, passed unanimously, but fortunately we had some friends in the Senate that defeated that bill. There was legislation introduced to strengthen the right to work laws to make it impossible for unions to collect union dues. That would have virtually wiped out the unions. Passed the House, we defeated it in the Senate. Now, after this last election, the Republicans now, for the first time in history, control both the House and the Senate. So we have some great concerns. The election was in November. This is now February. Every piece of legislation that we defeated in the last congressional session has already been reintroduced. So we face those battles all over again. But then we feel that a much larger conspiracy was beginning to take place, that the ILA locals, which were the locals that were leading the way in South Carolina for reform, was going to be targeted. This whole incident is not just about the ILA losing one ship, a small percentage of our work to a non-union competitor. It was about a setup in order to destroy the ILA in South Carolina. We have hired some private investigators to uncover some of the things that we feel that was going on behind the scenes. We found out that the contract that the Nordana lines, the shipping line that was going to go non-union, that they had entered into a contract with the state and the non-union workforce, a contract for 3 years that would be exclusively non-union labor. And that was actually stated in the contract. And that's illegal in the state of South Carolina. But we would not have known that had we not been sued ourselves and had gotten the right of discovery. When we found out that this vessel was going to go non-union, we felt that this was something that we simply could not stand by and watch happen in South Carolina, because over the last 40 years, the workers in South Carolina, the longshore workers, had worked very hard and very diligently to build the standards that we enjoy, because in South Carolina, the opportunities for the blue-collar workers are not that great. I mean, very few you're going to find that even would scrape the bottom of the middle class. But the industry that we work in, fortunately enough, can afford the type of wages and benefits that we receive. And we just simply cannot allow that to deteriorate just overnight. So we decided that we had to do something. We had to put up informational pickets to inform the public what was really happening here. This was not just about us losing some jobs. This was the deterioration of an industry standard that really helped the economy of Charleston to be very healthy. And we had done that. We worked with the local authorities, and we actually had 3 successful pickets where we worked very closely with the law enforcement officers, the local authorities, without any problems, any major confrontation. They actually gave us permission to go down to the ships, to look the other workers in their face and say, look, realize what you're doing to this economy. They're pitting one worker against the other, and we all are going to lose in this process. They allowed us to go down there. When they told us time was up, we went back to the picket line. And the message got to the state attorney general that this was pretty much a too soft of a deal that was going on down there. The longshoremen were allowed to go on the docks and to come back to the picket lines. So he was going to take over this case. He immediately called for 3 law enforcement summons where they sat down to plot and to design an attack against the workers down at the port. Before the 4th vessel called Charleston, we got a call from one of the lieutenants in the state law enforcement division who told us we were not going to believe what we were going to see out there, because they were going to amass 600 law enforcement officers to crush any type of protest the ILA was going to put up. They were going to finally have a chance to use the riot gear that they had bought just some months before in anticipation of some Y2K disturbance. They thought that the whole country was going to be in total chaos, and they had invested thousands and thousands of dollars in riot gear. Well, as all of you know, nothing happened January 1, 2000. I mean, everything was normal. There was a few minor interruptions in the transportation sector, but for the most part, everything went well. So they came out to try out these new riot gears. And on the night that ship came to Charleston, about 3 o'clock that day, we noticed the buildup beginning. Buses, prison buses, armored personnel vehicles, helicopters in the air, snipers on top of roofs, horseback, motorcycles, boats in the water. It looked like a war zone. And mind you, this was our Union Hall is not miles away from the terminal. We are just less than 200 yards away. So all this massive buildup is actually taking place right in front of our building. That night, we decided that we were not going to go down there. That was our strategy. We were not going to go there. They were going to be the ones to look like a fool the next day for spending all of the taxpayers' money. But we would come back at midnight. We would go home, set our clocks, wake up at midnight and come back and keep them out there all night. But we didn't know that they had informants in the building. And every strategy that we came up with, they were already informed about it down the street. So when the men were returning back to the Union Hall that night, they know why they were coming, and they met them, they intimidated them on the streets, sent them the long way around, and by the time it got to close to midnight, these men and women said that, look, we must at least go down to the same place we have always stood to put up our picket signs, and we will not be deterred by the presence of these officers. We told them not to engage the officers, but if you feel you had to go down there, please do. They went down there, and in less than 20 minutes, confrontation had already broken out. The first man was laid on the ground with his head split open. And as we ran down there to see what was going on, it sounded like a war zone. I mean, guns were being fired. Officers were bringing patrol cars right through the middle of our picketers. It was a miracle that no one was actually killed that night, because certainly some were seriously injured, including myself, who got clubbed beside my head. After we had reestablished calm, after we had recreated a buffer between both the officers and our people, for no reason whatsoever, I was clubbed beside my head. Got 12 stitches right there in the middle. Scar would take to my grave. That's when all you know what broke out. It was really then considered a war zone. They arrested 9 of our men that night, charged with simple trespassing. It took us nearly 20 hours to get them out of jail. They came out there, they were beaten, crippled. One guy lost hearing in the ear. I don't know if you ever seen the wound from a rubber bullet, but it's not a pretty scene. They lined them up before magistrates so that the whole city can see them like hardened criminals. Families embarrassed to the point that one gentleman's wife left home with the children, didn't want to face the schoolmates the next day. Bailed them out of jail. The Attorney General came back and said, I'm going to take this over now. I'm going to reinstitute every single charge. Rearrested these same men, put them back in jail. We raised the money again to bail them out. This happened 3 times. Then we went to court. They put on their case before the circuit court judge. Did not prove one thing against any one of these men. So the judge actually dropped the charges. The defense attorneys had only one statement to make. Your Honor, I move that the charges be dropped against all 9 of the longshoremen. The judge did that because they had not proved a thing. That's the only thing they said. The Attorney General then sought to go to the state grand jury and sought indictments on all 9 of these individuals, but only got indictments on 4. They then ran ads in the newspaper and on television and on the radio that if any citizen can come down to the police department and identify any longshoreman who just haven't been there, he was going to put him underneath the jail and you would receive a reward. The name of 2 individuals was turned up, and one of the gentlemen is Peter Washington right here today. They went back and indicted him. There we have the Charleston Five. And from last January, when this took place, till now, Lodger Ford, Peter Washington, and the other 3 men are still pretty much under house arrest. They were not rioting in the streets, tearing up buildings, this type of thing. We were at a job site on the side streets of this town where no businesses or any other type of communities are present. They cannot leave the state. They are only here today because we got a release from the court to allow them to travel outside of the state. They must be in their homes after 7 p.m. at night unless they are at work or at a union meeting. Family having a wake because death in the family, too bad. Church service, too bad. You must be home unless you're at work or at a union meeting. And what this is doing is actually trying to send a chill to all workers, unionized in the state of South Carolina and also in the country right now. Because if we are to allow these men to go to jail or to drain all of their resources in their own defense, do you think we will be able to get anyone on the picket line ever again should there be a need to picket? Because in addition to the criminal side, there's a civil side also. We are being sued for $1.5 million in damages from the non-union company. And they have now sought not only to name the locals as defendants, but also 27 individual men. And now we have the task of providing defense for all 27 of those individuals. We have been successful so far thanks to the ILWU, Local 10, all the locals up and down the coast, even the bike messenger local have all kicked in from the West Coast. I mean, we have been very, it's not cheap. Just to get the trial, it will cost an estimate of $225,000 just on behalf of the 5. We have already spent over $87,000 out of the Treasury just in defense of the 27. So you can see that, we still have our work cut out for us. That's why we are continuing to try to get out here and spread the message. Because even if these 27 men, should they have to go into their own pockets, drain their family resources to provide defense for them, certainly the Attorney General and the likes of Charlie Condon would have succeeded. Because once a union loses its right to picket, loses its right to withhold its labor, then we are finished. So we are here today to try to continue to spread this message and to try to work on behalf of these men and women in Charleston. I feel somewhat responsible for them being in this situation because I was the one who suggested that we put up the picket signs. I was the one who suggested that we did a number of things that we did. When it was announced that this vessel was going non-union, I pledged to my workforce, I pledged to the community that this one was so significant that we were not going to let this one go until we got the victory. Thanks to the international showing of solidarity with the International Dock Workers Council, the ITF, the International Transportation Federation, we were successful in getting our work back. There were men on the Spanish docks over in Spain that when the vessel came to port, they actually took letters aboard the vessel to the captains and told them, if you bring the vessels back into this port, work by labor other than the ILA, it would not work in this port. When the ship owners received those particular actions, brought Nordana back to the table. We didn't call them, they called us. And after 3 days of negotiating in our union hall, not with management, not in the Ports Authority headquarters, we were successful in getting that contract back. So again, thanks to the leadership that is being shown by Jim Spinoza and others, we feel that we are going to be successful. We are looking forward to this International Day of Solidarity. And those ports that we talked about over in the European country, that members of the IDC and others have also pledged that they will support this International Day of Solidarity. So we're looking forward to it. We do not feel that we will have achieved the ultimate victory until every single longshoreman in Charleston is exonerated.